It's come to my attention that a lot of you guys don't know who Elizabeth Smart is. What's that about? If you have not heard the story, you are in for a ride. I already knew everything about the story and I started taking notes on it and I literally started crying. Happy tears though for once. Guys, I put my phone on the window when I film and something feels so morally wrong when neighbors are walking by and I like wave to them as I'm talking about these horrible stories. I will literally be like, yeah, she chopped up her body in two, cut her head off. Good morning, how are you? Something's not right about that. All right, you're gonna feel so many different emotions the whole time throughout this case, so just be prepared for that. But Elizabeth Smart was abducted from her own home at age 14 in 2002 in Salt Lake City, Utah. Elizabeth's parents are Ed and Louise. They had a total of 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls, and they lived a wonderful life. In their household, they were raised Mormon, so they followed that lifestyle and those values. They lived in a beautiful home with a happy, loving family, and Elizabeth had a pretty normal upbringing. She was just a happy little girl living her happy little life. She was really close to everyone in her family. She loved to hang out with her friends. She was really into music and was so excited about growing up and experiencing everything that came along with that. June 5th, 2002, it's a Wednesday. Elizabeth is 14 at the time. She shares a bedroom with her little sister, Mary Catherine. Getting ready for bed, they read a book and then go to sleep. At 2 in the morning, Elizabeth wakes up to a man holding a knife to her neck. She hears a man's voice say, "Don't make any sound, just get up and come with me." I'm sure her very first thought was, is this a dream? But then she hears the man's voice again and realizes this is not a nightmare. The man who is in her bedroom whispering into her ear holding a knife to her neck is Brian David Mitchell. Brian is also from Salt Lake City and he is Mormon as well. From a young age, he was known to be really inappropriate around. He actually went to juvie when he was 16 for being inappropriate with a child. Brian had been married twice before and he had actually had children previously. Yeah, hard to believe he had been a father. Obviously got divorced from the 2 previous wives. At this point, he was currently married to his 3rd wife, 40-year-old Wanda Barzee. Wanda sucks too. Him and Wanda's big thing that they had in common was religion, but Brian thought that he was like the chosen one. He grew out a beard because he wanted to look like Jesus. He started dressing like Jesus. He's a little bit delulu. You'll get to know that. All right, so this is the guy that is whispering in Elizabeth's ear. When she's still waking up and coming to, her mindset is, if I don't do what he says, he might hurt me, he might hurt my sister, he might take my sister, so she decides to just get up and go with him. During this time, her little sister, Mary Catherine, is actually awake. She's just pretending to be asleep. Elizabeth has walked out of the room. She's walking down the hallway with this man, and shortly after, Mary Catherine actually wakes up and tries to run to her parents' room to let them know what's going on, but she ends up getting so scared, she runs back to her room and just hides. Elizabeth is guided through the kitchen door and out of the house. The whole time, Brian is holding a knife to her back, saying that she better do what he says, and if she doesn't, he's gonna kill her and her entire family. They start walking up a hill not too far from her house at all, and at this point they actually see a cop car drive by with his lights on. Brian forces Elizabeth to get down on the ground until the car drove past. This entire time, Elizabeth is obviously terrified. She's 14 years old. She just got taken from her own bed. She was so scared of what Brian was gonna do to her. She looked at Brian and said, "Can you just kill me now so my parents can find me and know what happened to me?" Brian just gives her a creepy smirk and says, "I'm not going to kill you yet." Elizabeth and Brian have been speaking. They're looking at each other's faces, and Elizabeth realized that she recognizes him. 7 months prior, her family had hired Brian as a contractor to do some work on their house. Just a little bit before 4 a.m., Mary Catherine, the little sister, runs to her parents' room to wake them up and let them know what just happened. Everyone in the house is awake now. They're running around looking for Elizabeth when her mom goes downstairs and realizes that the screen to the window had been cut. They call the police, and by 6 a.m., they have a full house of family members there to support the family, which is great, but the house was the crime scene, and now there's all these people walking around. So the crime scene has been contaminated. The cops take the family down to the station to question them. They speak to Mary Catherine, who was in the room when Elizabeth was taken, and she describes the man that she saw. She saw white male and said that she recognized his voice. The police took hours questioning the family, and they were busy doing that, so it took them a while to put this out to the public. They eventually did. They put pictures of her everywhere. Her face was all over the news, and a lot of people in Salt Lake City were now looking for Elizabeth. Back to Elizabeth and Brian, they've been climbing up this mountain to get to the secret campsite that Brian had set up. At the camp, there was a tent, a tarp, and Brian's wife, Wanda Barzee. Wanda walks up to Elizabeth, hugs her, and then Brian tells her to undress and put on a robe. Then he starts performing this weird ritual ceremony thing around Elizabeth and tells Elizabeth that she is now his wife. The entire time, Elizabeth is crying. She's terrified. She's even thinking about how she would be lucky if she just died now instead of having to go through whatever she was about to go through. Elizabeth ends up falling asleep sleep. She's exhausted and she wakes up to Brian tying her ankle with a metal cord to a tree. The cord was only 20 feet long, so she was only allowed to go as far as the cord allowed her to. That would be her life from now on for a very long time. She was being held captive, forced to listen to Brian and Wanda talk about all these crazy things. She was tortured on the daily in every kind of way. She was starved and forced to do chores around this campsite. They were not treating her as a human at all. Brian tells Elizabeth that he is a king and an angel, and he's blathering off about all these plans that he has to die and come back and save the world. He would tell her all about his plan to have so many wives and that Elizabeth was just the first. Back at home, the case is gaining so much media coverage. They're trying to get as many eyes on the case as they can as quickly as possible. The more people that see her face, the more people there are looking for her. Her father did a public appeal that was so incredibly heartbreaking. There are so many search efforts out. While her family and her parents are holding on to hope, they're also breaking down, because how could you not? 49 days into being held captive, Brian tells Elizabeth that he just got a feeling or a message from the universe that Elizabeth's cousin, who is also 14 years old, her name is Olivia, is supposed to be Brian's next wife. July 24th, Brian leaves the campsite to go to Olivia's house to go and try and kidnap her the exact same way that he kidnapped Elizabeth. Luckily, he isn't successful because Olivia's parents actually see him trying to cut open the screen in the window. Olivia's family reported that to the police, and for some weird reason, the police were not confident that that had anything to do with the disappearance of Elizabeth. They did not think that those two were related. More time passes and Wanda convinces Brian that she wants to get out of the campsite for a little bit. She wants to go out into the real world. They end up putting a veil on Elizabeth so that you could only see her eyes, and they go out into the real world. They end up at a random house party. Elizabeth has her veil on, and someone actually took a picture at that party, which is crazy. The guy in the picture actually spoke to Elizabeth because he could sense that something was off, but he didn't recognize her, and Elizabeth did not say anything, so ended up getting kicked out of the party, and she was just back stuck with Brian and Wanda. They're back at the campsite, but 4 months into her being held captive, they decide that they need to go to California because it's starting to get cold in Utah. All three of them, Elizabeth, Brian, and Wanda, end up going to a library to go and find a map to figure out how to get to California. While at the library, someone recognized Elizabeth. They called the police and a detective showed up. While Brian is in the bathroom, the detective goes up to Elizabeth and Wanda and says, "I'm looking for Elizabeth Smart. Can you guys please take your veils off?" Before they could say anything, Brian comes out of the bathroom and he's very calm throughout this whole thing, and he says, "Sorry, like, this is my daughter," and taking off their veils is against their religion, so they can't do that. And guess what? The detective was like, okay, and just let them go. You may be wondering, why didn't Elizabeth say anything the times that she was out in public? But fear is so paralyzing, and there's nothing in the entire world scarier to Elizabeth Smart than Brian David Mitchell. She doesn't know what he's capable of. He took her from her bed, and she was just so incredibly scared of him that she just didn't say anything. Elizabeth, Brian, and Wanda make it to California, and back at home, Elizabeth's parents are still doing everything they can. Investigation is now at a point where they're trying to figure out who could have done this, who could have taken her. They start focusing on all of the contractors who had previously worked at the Smart family household. There were over 60 of them. That's when they finally get his name, Brian David Mitchell. He specifically stood out because he had a criminal record. They were off track for a second, focusing on a different guy, but in October of 2022, somehow, in some way, everything came back to Elizabeth's sister, Mary Catherine. She runs to her parents one day and says, "I remember who it was. It was Brian David Mitchell." Okay, and that may seem crazy and impossible to some people, but the way that your mind can block things out to protect yourself is actually crazy. And I didn't believe like to what extent your mind can actually do that, but it happened to my grandma when my grandpa passed. She went to his funeral and like stood up there and everything, and she was telling me all about how she didn't even remember there being a funeral. Like, my grandma had no recollection at all of being at my grandpa's funeral. So it's honestly really impressive and kind of bizarre how much your mind can like block things out just because it's like dangerous for your mind. I don't know, but it is crazy. The Smart family take Brian's name to the police and they come up with a sketch of him. Eventually though, his name and the sketch are released to the public, so everyone now is filled in on this guy and know to look for him. February 2003, 8 months of being held hostage. Elizabeth had not had any food or water for 3 days. She was laying there just looking up at the sky, thinking about how she would be okay with dying at this point. She thanks, I'm getting goosebumps, she thanks God for the beautiful life that she did live when she lived at home with her family, but she says that now she would be okay with just dying, and she comes to peace with it. At the same time that she's having those thoughts, it starts raining. Literally got like, I have goosebumps all over my body. She's able to drink water, and it was like a miracle, like a sign for her not to give up. Elizabeth is able to convince Brian that they need to go back to Utah. They end up hitchhiking, and they're now back in Utah. Back in Utah, remember the sketch of Brian and his name had been released, so people are not only looking for Elizabeth Smart now, but they're also looking for Brian. One day, police get 2 separate calls letting them know that Brian is at Walmart with Elizabeth Smart. Law enforcement goes to the Walmart, and the entire building is surrounded by cop cars and police officers to make sure that there was no getting away with it. When Brian, Elizabeth, and Wanda walk out, they immediately ask Brian for his ID, and he says that he doesn't have his ID, they're traveling preachers, and that the little girl he was with was his daughter. Officers pull Elizabeth away from them, and they say, "We know you're Elizabeth Smart, it's okay, just tell us." But Elizabeth is so terrified of Brian that she says, "No, I don't know who Elizabeth is." They end up getting her in a police car and take her back to the station to question her. She's left alone by herself in this room. She has no idea what's about to happen. The door of the room opens, and it's her dad. Her dad runs over to Elizabeth and hugs her and says, "Elizabeth, is it really you?" And she goes, "Yes, Dad," and immediately starts to cry. Oh my God, I'm gonna cry. Her entire family and all of the friends are finally reunited, and her parents did such a good job at keeping her protected. They kept her away from the media and tried to take all the right steps to make sure they did everything correctly to take care of Elizabeth. Elizabeth does end up going to therapy later on, but she says that most of her healing came from her family. She was just so happy to be home, and she had this whole other new view of the way that she looked at life. She was so much more appreciative of everything around her because she didn't have it for so long. Meanwhile, obviously law enforcement is questioning Brian, and he was wanting to act insane so that he could blame all of his actions on him being insane, and he just was not cooperating whatsoever. Finally, March 18th, 2003, Wanda Barzee and Brian David Mitchell are charged with aggravated kidnapping, aggravated SA, and aggravated what a hard word. Who came up with that word? Burglary. Wanda pled guilty and was sentenced to concurrent terms of 15 years in state and federal prison. So she is out. She's out of prison. Due to so many delays and so many mental evaluation for Brian, it took Brian's case almost 8 years to go to court. Elizabeth does end up testifying against him, which is so brave. And finally, in 2010, the jury found him guilty of kidnapping and transporting a minor across state lines with intent to engage in SA. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tell me that is not the most insane case you've ever heard. The most inspiring, just like everything about it is so unbelievable. Elizabeth Smart is one of the most inspiring people. She has become an advocate for missing persons and victims of SA. She is now a wife, a mother, and a survivor. I want to end the video with a quote from Elizabeth Smart because this also gave me goosebumps. Elizabeth since then has said, "I have a wonderful life, and there's every reason to believe that there is nothing quite as resilient, I think, in this whole world as the human spirit." It's so awesome to be able to finish a video on a happy note. Like, this is just the best. Okay, love you guys literally so much, more than you could ever imagine, and massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.